listening to Over the Oxer podcast with Tracy Cole for all things to do with the mind for equestrians.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Tracy, and I just wanted to do a very quick introduction because we've had lots and lots more downloads and listens in the last couple of months, so people may not know exactly who I am. My name's Tracy Cole. I'm a master NLP trainer, which means I can train people to become trainers of NLP and master practitioners and NLP practitioners. So I can train people to become mindset coaches themselves. I still do lots and lots of coaching, primarily with equestrians, because I am one. And I love the fact that we're constantly working on ourselves and our horses, and it's a journey. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about a fuller journey, your life journey as an equestrian. So I want to talk about an invisible hurdle. And it's that voice that sometimes isn't inaudible, but it is invisible, that self-talk voice. Sometimes it whispers to you, sometimes it screams. And if you're of a certain age, or you've overcome a certain incident, then that voice may say something like, I'm not as brave as I used to be, or I'm too old to start jumping. Or the classic is something like, well, what if I fall? And every equestrian has been there. And certainly the older you get, the more likely it is that you start to tell yourself these things. And what if, when we tell ourselves these things, that our mind responds by almost making us like that? So if you're saying, I'm too old to jump, your mind kind of makes it so that you feel older and so you don't jump. Stay with me because we're going to take a little trip back in time. We're going to go back to 1959. I want to tell you about a Harvard study that was carried out many years ago now by a psychologist called Dr. Ellen Langer. And she carried out this study in 1979. She took a group of men who were in their late 70s and 80s to a retreat. But it wasn't a holiday. It was a kind of time capsule. And what happened was that everything about the place that they were staying was of 1959. So the music that came on the radio, the television programs that came on were all 1959. The newspapers were all 1959. The magazines were all 1959. The furniture, the decor was all from the 1950s. So when the men got there, they were told there's just one rule. Do not reminisce about the past. So don't go into reverie. Don't start thinking about what you were doing in 1959. Just live as if this is the present. So you're living in the present moment, but the year is 1959. And so when they had discussions about things like politics, for instance, or current affairs, they had to talk about what was going on in 1959. Another thing that's quite striking is that these old men, some were quite stooped, some had quite a lot of physical aches and pains, some had arthritis and so on. They all had to carry their own luggage. So nobody helped them. So it didn't matter how long it took them to get their luggage from the ground floor to their rooms, but they all carried their own luggage. Okay, so what were the results? Well, the results were staggering because it only took 1 week to see that these men didn't just feel better in themselves, but they physically changed. The researchers had certain physical parameters that they were measuring. So, for instance, grip strength, which all improved. Their posture, in other words, how straight their backs were, that all improved. And their eyesight, unbelievably sharpened. It was as though they were acting as if they were 20 years younger. And because they were acting in that way, they'd immerse themselves in a time 20 years beforehand, then their bodies somehow followed suit. It was as though they were communicating to their cells that they were 20 years younger. And therefore, don't follow the old man program, if you like, but follow a new program from 20 years ago. And that caught my attention. The fact that they were unconsciously, not with any purpose that they knew of, living as though they were 20 years younger, and their body responded. So how could we apply that to riding? Because lots of riders say things like, I used to be fearless, or I used to be able to jump 1.20 meters and now I don't even like trotting poles, or I'm in my 50s, so, I'm not going to have the same balance that I had when I was 30. And when somebody starts to talk like that, they're talking themselves into the old program. So they are literally commanding their body, they are commanding their nervous system to be stiff, to be reactive, and to be fearful. So in order to override this, obviously we've got to sort of get into our own time capsule. So think back to a time when you felt much better and much more confident about your riding. And it may have been when you were a teenager, or it may have been when you were 5 years old, or when you were 30 years old. It may have been before you had a certain accident or incident or some other event that shook your nerves. And create that time capsule, for instance, when you're grooming. So when you're grooming, instead of thinking about all your aches, cast your mind back to that time when you were riding without fear and you were just going for it. And talk to your horse in your head, or if you want to, you can do it out loud, but in your head, and just tell them about how that was. And then, once you've told them that, you were speeding around, you were jumping this, that, and the other, you were hurling yourself across the countryside, you were having fun, you were laughing, start to talk about it as though it's the present tense. So I jump 1.20 meters. I love jumping. I love competing. I love going out in the open countryside. I love riding any horse. I love getting on the horses that nobody else will. Now, I'm not saying that you'll do these things because that's your choice, but that you will go back in your mind to have the same kind of attitude that you once had. So your homework, if you like, if you want to take any homework from this, is having that sort of counterclockwise or anti-clockwise cue. You're turning the clock back. So before you get on, think about one physical trait that your younger self had that you envy now. It could have been that you had lighter hands, deeper seat, better leg position. Maybe you sat upright a little bit more. Maybe you looked ahead. Maybe you didn't look down so much. Whatever it might have been, recall that and recall it in the present tense. So I have a deep seat. I have light hands. I look up and around to where I'm going, so that you feel as though, rather than being the rider who might be worried in some way or overthinking in some way, but that you become more curious, more capable, and more physically resilient as well. And whenever your brain says, no, but you can't do that, you don't do that, then you can answer back. Give your brain a mouthful and say, well, that's funny, because in my world, we do it every Tuesday. So I hope you had some food for thought from all of this, and I hope you go away and think about your own golden era and what you're going to start telling yourself when you're grooming and when you're just about to get on. Try it for about a week. Remember, those men were immersed in that environment for a week, totally. See if you can do it for 1 week. It's not the total immersion, but maybe you'll start to see changes as quickly as they did. Take care, and I'll see you again really soon.